So I just want to share some things with you guys today about the history of Pentecostalism. And so how and where did Pentecostalism movement start? So if we go back to 1906, we know that this is the start, at least for us, this is the start where we see the Azusa Street revival kind of take place. But prior to, in 1901, a man by the name of Charles Parham, he taught that the speaking in tongues was the initial physical evidence of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And this was in Midwest USA in Topeka, Kansas at Bethel Bible College. And so even then, these roots that he laid down can be kind of traced back into the holiness movement that took place in the 19th century. And so if we fast forward to 1906, a man by the name of William J. Seymour, and an African-American preacher, was part of or really kind of stirred up the catalyst for the holiness, or this Azusa Street revival, this holiness movement, this Pentecostal, the holiness Pentecostal movement that started in LA, in Los Angeles, California. And so he moved to LA to head this holiness church. And would you have it? His church was found right there on the street of Azusa Street. And now we see this movement was a multi-ethnic and emotionally charged event that lasted years, and is considered to be the catalyst for modern Pentecostalism. You know, people who attended, speaking of, people who attended this message and practices took to their own communities and cities around the world. So we have guys like J.B. Cashwell, who felt, and we coined these guys as, some of them are as the Azusa Street Pilgrims. These are just some of the names that were highlighted. J.B. Cashwell. He was baptized in the Spirit, and as soon as he was baptized, he didn't know it at the moment, but he spoke German, you know, because somebody was translating. People were like, oh, wow, he's speaking German. He didn't know, but obviously the interpretations, people were recognizing that in him. Oral Roberts, who later kind of changed the definition from the initial physical evidence to kind of coined the term prayer, our prayer language is what we know now today. He has Azusa Street ties. T.D. Barrett and Petros, they felt like they were called to go to Oslo and have an Oslo meeting in Norway. I believe it's in Norway, Oslo, or Sweden, somewhere there in the Scandinavian. And 2,000 people showed up, and they were touched by the Spirit. They were touched by them coming to and having them, 2,000 people experience the Spirit. Willie C. Hoover, he felt like he was called to go to Santiago, Chile, and be head of the Methodist Church in 1909. Daniel Berger, we see he was a Swedish immigrant, and during this movement, during the Azusa Street revival, he felt like God was dropping this para. Maybe at first he kind of thought it was like, maybe it was his prayer language, maybe it was something new, and then he started looking and like, what city, what community could this be tied to? Later he found out that this was he found a small community in Brazil, and he was in 1912 he moved to Para, Brazil, and he helped kind of funnel and start the Christian movement, I guess is one way to look at it, or this Pentecostal movement in Brazil, that we now know that Brazil is one of the most Christian nations, I guess. They're very Christ-filled, very rah-rah for Jesus, for Christ. And then we see Luigi Francesconi. He felt like he was called to go to Russia, Moscow, and he touched a lot of lives. The Holy Spirit was there. But then we see, because during this time, obviously the regime, Russia, he later became a martyr for this movement. And so it's amazing that these men, and obviously people just like them, but these men that were highlighted, they just kind of showed the glimpse of the way for the Pentecostal movement to really go about the earth. And so the history of the Pentecostal movement, for me, reading the literature and kind of how it affected me, I know my stuff, and I knew my stuff, but I always had a hard time of placing like theology and Reformed theology and how tulip and Reformed theology kind of takes place with like Arminianism and Calvinism, and kind of where those two kind of integrate, where they separate, how Finney and all these different how Knight kind of shares in Wesley in the renewal of the Pentecostal spirituality, and like thinking of like Martin Luther and Wesley and Finney and all these different things of like sanctification. And honestly, it was a lot for me just to kind of like process, but this kind of made it helped me kind of place into order where I landed as far as the Pentecostal movement, as far as the history, because it's great to see that. And I fully believe that, and I agree with Charles Parham in that he taught that the speaking in tongues was the initial physical evidence of baptism in the Holy Spirit. But I also agree with Oral Robertson that it's more than just the initial physical evidence, that it's a prayer language that we can communicate with God. And I think, just thinking about it, do I believe or not believe that every Christian should live the Pentecostal way? Yes and no. Yes, in the aspect of, and I know for me and the people that I know and come in contact, I know, I come from a more charismatic, non-denominational, Pentecostal type of background. And so I know, charismatic Catholics and charismatic Methodists and charismatic, different peoples of different denominations, charismatic Lutherans. But do I believe that every Christian should live the Pentecostal way? Here's where I kind of landed on it. Yes and no. Yes, in that the cross and the Spirit, like one of my greatest mentors, he is a Bible believing, he is a man of God, he is a Baptist, and I've kind of spoken with him about it, and he's kind of shared like he believes, and I forget what it's called, the term, but he believes the apostles and the Holy Spirit. He believes that what they did then was legit, but it no longer has a place for us now. And so that's the part that I don't believe. I believe that he's missing out on another level of relationship or friendship with the Lord, revelation with the Lord. And so do I believe that every Christian should live in the Pentecostal way? Yes, in that it was in our literature. Wesley kind of said, it was Knight who kind of made this point that, oh snap, that the Pentecostals, and maybe it was Wesley who had a problem with it, or maybe it was Knight, but the Pentecostals have a problem with, they want more power of the Holy Spirit, but not the fruit of the Holy Spirit. And that's the part that I fully agree with. So do I believe that we should all live in the Pentecostal way? Yes, in that there is power of the Holy Spirit, but we can't let that be the only thing that we seek. We should, and this is where my no comes into play, no, in that we should desire the fruits of the Spirit. And because of the fruits, the power, yes, the power is in us, blah, 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 all that stuff, the Holy Spirit, the indwelling Spirit, but the power is a byproduct of the fruits that we so now freely have available to us because of the Spirit. So it's not just an initial physical evidence, the speaking of tongues, but it's also the Holy Spirit is a fruit and an extension, and the fruits and the gifts are an extension. Speaking in tongues is a gift of the Spirit. And so, and I appreciated the way Knight wrote it in. The Pentecostals want the gift, but they don't want the gift giver. Or that's kind of like their main focus. That's kind of how I took it. Like, they want the power, they want the Holy Spirit, but they don't want the fruits. They don't want the byproduct. They don't want the Holy Spirit himself. They want the power, or they want what the Holy Spirit gives and not the Holy Spirit himself. So that's kind of like yes and no for me. And then really just one fact that I think you guys should know about Pentecostalism. And this helped me. I didn't really know this, but the fivefold Gospels, and you can kind of, I guess, 5 mini facts within this one big fact. And they state that 1, justified by faith, we're saved. 2, the entire sanctification is a second blessing. And this is Wesley's teaching. 3, baptism of the Holy Spirit with tongues. 4, this is fivefold gospel. 4, divine healing as in the atonement or the initial evidence. That is, and then 5, second, they believed in the second coming of the raptures. And so they believe that tongues would be where you go. So if you spoke Swahili, they believe that you would go to Africa to minister and bring the Pentecostal movement to them, right? They were expecting to speak that language through the tongues that they were given by the Spirit. So I thought that was very interesting. I don't know exactly, now looking back to where I'm at, where I landed, I can see the differences where I'm at and where they're at, and this was a very heavy, at least mentally for me, just a thought process of being able to break it down and how it affects me now, now that I have a better understanding of where kind of all this is coming from. So appreciate you guys. I hope you guys took something away from this history of Pentecostalism. Very different, but very insightful this week.